So, hello, this is Robert of Mayflower Bookshop with Grimm's Fairy Tales, the Iron Hans, or the Iron John, that was made famous with the men's movement, but it has to do with men and women, you know? So I shared in the first talk about Iron John. We read Iron John a little bit, and you have the idea that there was a king, and there was a great forest near his palace, full of all kinds of wild animals, and the king lost a huntsman, and then he sent two more, and then he sent all of his huntsmen. So there was 3 days of losing people. And then this fourth unknown friend comes along later and goes to see what's going on and where everybody got lost. And he discovers that his lower mind, the dog, gets eaten. So, in other words, we get born and we're looking into our physical, emotional, and mental. We're looking at the spirit, soul, body. And we go into the world with our thinking and feeling and our actions, or our physical, emotional, mental, and we lose. Our oneness goes out and we disappear. Our duality of inner and outer goes out and we disappear. We send all of our senses into the world and we disappear and we can't figure it out. And there's death and illness and suffering. And at some point, the unknown friend, the fourth way, the fourth member of our spiritual soul that hasn't become conscious, so it's unknown. It's an unknown friend. And sometimes that comes through other people. And so the unfriend in Iron Hans, Iron John, the unknown friend goes into the wildness of the world and craziness of the world, chaos and unconsciousness and death and destruction. And he sees that his lower mind is eaten by some wild arm that comes out of the lake. A sword doesn't come out of the lake from the lady of the lake. It's like a wild man's arm that drags. So the unknown friend drains the pond and discovers a wild man that with hair down to his knees, brown, rusty, iron looking. Iron in the blood is the vehicle for the reincarnating ego. The warmth and the iron is Michaelic courage and Mars energy, maybe. The sun, representative of the fire of the sun, the sword of Manjushri, King George. It can be a lot of things. So in other words, let's put this simple. The fourth member of the ego, the unconscious ego that's spiritualized or wishing, just is trying to figure out the world and discovers the wild man. That wild man represents our primitive giant, our connection to the, like as we lose our physical sense or we evolve, we go to the etheric cosmic giant, cosmic consciousness that is unrefined and Christed or Buddha'd. It's not Buddha'd up yet into the higher self. And it's like our raw energy could hurt us if we were to take drugs and drink too much and eat too much, and the wild, passionate, unconscious can lead us astray. The word astray is to go astray or into the astral. So I'm looking at it from an anthroposophical point of view, or Theosophical Rosicrucian point of view, and the wild man represents the cosmic, etheric, the infinite energy of the planets and stars. And we have a piece of that in us, and we have a great sense of energy that we get, uplifting energy. But it can also suck us down and root us, into an extreme. And so in this story, the fourth member, the ego, captures the wild man. And see, our addictions need to be caged. Like our bad habits need to be put in a disciplined order or a cage of training. In other words, we have to have containment over what's uncontained. And we can't just eat everything and do everything we have to have the discipline, if we're going to be a painter, to frame the painting and not just paint everywhere. We're not enlightened yet. If you're a musician, the song has a beginning and a middle and an end, and you can't just play forever. I mean, maybe you can if you're part of the universal breath, the great breath, but we're not enlightened. So there's a symbolic thing here when you reach 7 to 14 and beyond, that we need to train our wild kid that's grown too big without a brain and compassionate wisdom heart. And so the fourth member brings back the wild man in iron and puts him in an iron cage. And we're in the iron age where our spiritual self is been, all these things have like double meaning and triple meaning and several meaning, depending on where we're at in our evolution of mind, heart, soul, spirit, and body. So there's a great astonishment when somebody sees somebody with infinite energy and wildness, the wild man. There's a lot of magic to it, and we see it in the movies in Hollywood. And we see it in good and bad ways, in politics and power and making money and being successful and attaining wealth, inward or outward. But this wild man is put in an iron cage in the courtyard. The courtyard usually represents not the barnyard or the churchyard, but it represents the thinking. The barnyard is the physical animal, and the courtyard is the thinking, and the churchyard is the graveyard of death, of desire and fear, so that you can get to a spiritual experience inside the holy temple of human being, spiritual soul. So the king has the wild man put in a cage in his courtyard and forbids the door to be opened on pain of death. Because when you let the wild man out, you can die. But if you can harness your spiritual wildness, you could heal the world. You know, I mean, you could do a lot of things. You could grow a garden and clean the house and fix things. And the queen has the key in her keeping. And from this time forward, everyone could again go into the forest in safety because there's no wild man. But then we're too contained and everything's contained and nobody's having fun. So the story goes on. The king had a son of 8 years who was once playing in the courtyard, and while he was playing, his golden ball fell into the cage. Now again, this golden ball represents spiritual innocence, but the gold is outside of us. We're playing with outer, the gold of money and external talents. It's not inner gold yet. And so the 8-year-old, which is representative here, symbolic of hitting the higher octave, where you are in touch with the gold, right? And the golden ball the gold in us wants to unite heaven and earth, and the wild and the tame and the thinking and the feeling. You know, the golden ball falls into the cage, and the boy runs thither and said, "Give me my ball out. Give me my ball out." We could ponder that sentence. Give me my ball out. So in other words, there's this like inner gold and outer gold, and they contest each other. "Not till you have opened the door for me," answered the wild man. "No," said the boy, "I would not do that. The king has forbidden it," and ran away. The next day he went again and asked for his ball. The wild man said, "Open my door," but the boy would not. On the third day, again, this threefoldness of spirit, soul, body, thinking, feeling, willing, physical, emotional, mental. I leave it to you to figure it out. And again, this could be the little girl, couldn't it? The little girl who has the wild women who run with the wolves, you know? The wild woman's in the cage, you know? And we have to like be able to get the spiritual message without getting stuck with the messenger, but no spiritual message. And we don't want the message without a vehicle for expressing it in the world. So don't get hung up on the male-female thing. Get the spiritual truth, get the wisdom, and apply it to your life. Okay, so let's go on with the story the way it's written here, and you can make the adjustment. By the way, the Russian fairy tales, which I'll get into later, often have female heroes. So that's cool. And they have like wild women too. Okay. But the boy, on the third day, the king had ridden out hunting, and the boy went once more and said, I cannot open the door even if I wish, for I have not the key. Then the wild man said, it lies under your mother's pillow. You can get it there. Okay, that's another great sentence. The key is a lie as long as it's under the mother's pillow. It lies under the mother. It's sleeping. And a lot of times we need to get our power back from either our father or our mother. We need to learn the wisdom that they had, but we need to carry it further for the sake of all of us and our humanity. And the wild man that's caged is our addictions and our habits and our universal spirited craziness and chaos and wild person that we're trying to tame it into getting some work done and coming into fruition on the planet. So the wild man tells the boy that the key is under the mother's pillow, and there's a whole mystery there of psychology. There's a wonderful book by Marion Woodman called Leaving the Father's House, which men could apply to leaving the mother's house. And yeah, there's a lot of insight here. Usually when I'm giving a talk to the public, we would hear from people now what their experience of this is, and I would comment. But let's continue. The boy who wanted to have his ball back cast all thought to the winds and brought the key. In other words, we want the gold. We want what makes us feel alive. We want what makes us come alive. So he goes and gets the key. The door opens with difficulty, and the boy pinched his fingers. In other words, we have to pinch our spirit, our appetites, and our five senses. We have to like do some kind of discipline or work. And if we rush into spiritual and creativity and seeing and doing too much, we could hurt ourselves or pinch ourselves. But that's another story. Let's keep going. When the door was open, the wild man stepped out, gave him the golden ball, and hurried away. The boy had become afraid. He called and cried out, "O wild man, do not go away, or I shall be beaten." The wild man turned back, took him up, and set him on his shoulder, and went with hasty steps into the forest. See, this is a place where we free our wild man, and we are becoming teenagers or adults, and we we have all this energy. Sometimes this happens from 7 to 14, and sometimes it's later. 14 is 21. But what happens is our wild side doesn't run us. Like, are we driving or are we driven? And when the boy sits on the shoulders of the wild man, there's this beginning of being able to tame our wild side, that we stand on the shoulders of giants. We stand on the shoulder of millions of years of the descent of intelligence from the stars and the arising of form from the earth. We stand on millions of years of people that went before us. And we stand on giants of virtue and qualities and talents that we can be here to figure it out. And we're children of God and the goddess, the great goddess, if you want to put it that way. And so we have this cosmic energy that we can ride. So when the king came home, he observed the empty cage. And this is a practice of emptiness, we could say too. Radical stillness in the heart soul. But I'm interpreting as we go along because we're adults and we need to learn this so we can help the world and ourselves. So you see how there were 3 stages of the king sending out huntsmen, and then the 4th step. And here there's 3 attempts to get the ball back. And the boy goes for the 4th step, which is to ride the giant of the cosmic energy, the kundalini, the love, the truth. And he's not going to go back to the old past, because the past will beat you up. And the king is the old king. And you're now older now, and you want to find your soulmate, which is your own soul. So the king comes home and he observes the empty cage and asks the queen, how has that happened? She knew nothing about it. The highest wisdom is to know nothing, isn't it? But it's really calm, abiding space, equanimity, and emptiness practice. And they're hinting at it here, but really at the beginning it looks like nothing, but it means there's space to learn new things. She knew nothing about it and sought the key, but it was gone. She called the boy, but no one answered. The king sent out people to seek for him in the fields, but they did not find him. Then he could easily guess what had happened, and much grief reigned in the royal court. When the wild man had once more reached the dark forest, he took the boy down from his shoulder and said to him, you would never see your father and mother again, but I will keep you with me, for you have set me free, and I have compassion on you. If you do all I bid you, you shall fare well. Now, this is a point where we get in touch with our higher self, which is way bigger and a giant, and it's unconscious giant to our little self. Like we may have quit drugs or quit drinking or quit smoking or quit bad habits and quit anger and negativity. And we can never see the old ego, separatist ego, and the body anymore like we used to be. We can never see that again in the same way. And we have compassion on our bigger self has compassion for ourself that tries so hard. And we have to set our higher self free to free our lower self. This is a very deep moment. The higher self said, the giant says, I'll keep you with me. You have set me free, and I have compassion for you. You will fare well if you do all I bid. I'll listen to the higher self, of course. And this is a very symbolic thing. It's kind of the meaning is opposite. The astral world is kind of opposite of what appearance sometimes. Of treasure and gold I have enough, and more than anyone in the world, the giant says. He made a bed of moss, green, moss for the boy on which he slept, and the next morning the man took him to a well and said, behold, the gold well is as bright and clear as crystal, and you shall sit beside it. And take care that nothing falls into it, or it will be polluted. Now, I wonder if this is the woman by the well with Jesus in the Gospels. Or is this the Celtic well that rejuvenates you and gives you the taste of foreknowledge and omniscience and omnipotence and all-knowing and being and awareness? We'll see. So the giant is now said to be a man for some reason. In fairy tales and the dream time and the Greek myths, things can turn into other things, and there's a metamorphosis always taking place to reveal truth and higher love. So the man tells him that the gold well, is as bright and clear as crystal, and you shall sit beside it, and take care that nothing falls into it, or it will be polluted. So once you purify your inner self, there's this golden well. And you're afraid to fall into it because you might lose yourself again. But on the other hand, your inner self has a spark of the sun, and it makes everything gold, in a way. But you have to have this bridge between the inner and outer. You can't just fall in or fall out. So we're sitting by the well of the secret of the rejuvenation of the earth, and turning water into wine, you might say. The boy places himself by the brink of the well and often saw a golden fish or golden snake show itself therein. The Pisces fish age of, the Piscean fish or the golden age. The golden snake is be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Jesus says it's not a St. Patrick thing that the garden snakes are dispelled by the men's club, but it's like the garden. It's a return to the garden and the golden wisdom of knowing how to shed your skin and be renewed. So the giant man tells the boy not to let anything fall in. You don't fall. You're trying to bring things out of it, I think. Okay, well, let's see what they say. As he was thus sitting, his finger hurt him so violently, and he involuntarily put it in the water. See, there's a part of us that wants to touch reality and make things new and gold. But anyway, he drew it out quickly, but he saw that it was quite gilded and turned to gold, and whatsoever pains he took to wash the gold off again, all was of no purpose. In the evening, Iron Hans came back, looking at the boy, and said, "What has happened to the well?" "Nothing, nothing," he answered, and held his finger behind his back, that the man may not see it. But he said, "You have dipped your finger into the water. This time it may pass, but take care you do not again let anything go in." By daybreak, the boy was already sitting by the well and watching it. His finger hurt him again, and he passed it over his head, and then unhappily a hair fell down into the well. He took it quickly out. So in other words, the physical hand that's in the lower third of your body goes in the well, and now the second time a hair does from the head. So physical thinking, there's a threefoldness here too. It's a process of enlightenment of the physical, and then the etheric, and later the astral, and then the ego, I think. But here we go. He took the hair out quickly, but it was already quite gilded. Iron Hans came and already knew what had happened. The higher self always knows what's going on. You have let a hair fall into the well. Well, oh well, said he. I will allow you to watch by it once more. The silent watcher, trying to develop? We'll see. But if this happens for the third time, then the well is polluted, and you can no longer remain with me. See, after these three total experiences of spiritual body and then the threefoldness of each, we have to go on. You can't stay with the past. We have to discover each day anew, renewed. On the third day, the boy sat by the well and did not stir his finger, however much it hurt him. But the time was long to him, and he looked at the reflection of his face in the surface of the water. You know, the true face, the primordial face, the light of the eyes is a window of the soul. You know, it's a journey to the heart, I think. The waters of the heart, maybe. The waters of Aquarius. As he still bent down more and more while he was doing so, looking at his reflection, it reminds you of Dionysius, doesn't it? Looking in the mirror, and the Titans broke him in pieces, but we shall not say that now. Let's keep going. He was trying to look straight into the eyes, and his long hair fell down from his shoulders into the water. He raised himself up quickly, but the whole of the hair of his head was already golden and shone like the sun. See, we lose our old wisdom and our old hair, and we're regaining the radiancy of the sun, of our experience before we were on the earth. And before this earth, we were on the moon. We lived in a subtle world as far out and as round as the circle of the moon. And before that, we lived on the sun. And before that, we lived on the circle of Saturn in the primordial darkness and oneness and the warmth. This is Anthroposophical, Theosophical, Rosicrucian wisdom I'm using. I'm using the Mayflower Bookshop wisdom. And of course, you're free to interpret it in other ways, but I wanted to break the spell that this is just a men's club. This is a spiritual soul awakening, whether men or women. So you can imagine how terrified the poor boy was. He took his pocket handkerchief and tied it around his head. His whole head was aglow with golden light. And he wrapped his head and hid it under the handkerchief so the man may not see it. When he came, he already knew everything. When the man came, the Iron John, he took the handkerchief off. Then the golden hair streamed forth. And let the boy excuse himself as he might, it was of no use. You have not stood the trial. Or did he really go through the spiritual? It's like the chemical wedding trial, where it looks like you're failing, but you have to go on to a higher initiation. You have not stood the trial and can stay here no longer. Go forth into the world. That's the real woods, or it's the real star kingdom. Go forth into the world. There you will learn what poverty is. Yeah, when you go into the world, you learn the poverty of the spirit, but you'll remember. So the dog, the dog represents, usually in fairy tales and dreams, the lower mind. Like in dreams, everything is you. Like 101, 102, 103. 101 is that everything's you. And in good fairy tales, everybody's you. These are all parts of ourself. And it's an initiation process of individualization and growing up from childhood to boyhood to teenage to manhood and to maturity of the thinking, feeling, and willing. After the physical, emotional, and mental grow up, the thinking, feeling, and willing bring the higher self down into the action. So when you hear noises, that's either my dog or the carpenter. Okay. So the wild man comes back and says, take the handkerchief off. And we have to, at some point, uncover our spiritual wisdom and let it shine. Then the golden hair streamed forth, and let the boy excuse himself as he might, but it was of no use. You have not stood the trial, and you have to go forth into the world and learn what poverty is. But as you have not a bad heart, his good heart, and as I mean well by you, there is one thing I will grant you. If you fall into any difficulty, come to the forest and cry, Iron Hans. Iron John, right? The word John means Chan in Buddhism, and Chan Buddhism, and Dzyan, the stanzas of Dzyan, the stanzas of John, like the Gospel of John. Well, Blavatsky wrote the whole secret doctrine on the stanzas of Dzyan, some ancient Tibetan and pre-Tibetan and Atlantean wisdom. Iron wisdom, right? The iron of the courage of the blood to meet spiritual thinking into the heart, what's true with all beings. As you have not a bad heart, and as I mean well by you, there is one thing I will grant you. If you fall into any difficulty, come to the forest and cry. In other words, go to the wilderness. We have to go to the last wilderness, which is the radical stillness within and the wilderness areas of nature and each other. That's what I say. And see, the men's club missed a lot of the spiritual teaching. They went right for the empowerment of men, and it accidentally, it might have accidentally got distracted, but there was a lot of good in it. And that's why I was a good friend of James Hillman and, love these guys. Robert Moore I disagreed with, but hey, he wrote The King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, and then at the end, nobody can explain it. He shot his wife and himself. That's right, you did hear me correctly. And, and I had kind of a parting of the ways with him because I kept telling him he was too hard on the feminine principle of Sophia wisdom. It's not that I'm right. I couldn't help him. If I'm right, I could have helped him. Now, the guy that's here now may have helped him, and maybe I'm talking to him right now, wherever he is. And a guy that's so powerful like that, I'm not judging. I'm saying that he's dead, on his body, and so he's probably spiritually still working with the men's groups and really trying to correct any mistakes and take us off further. But so is Buddha and Rudolf Steiner and Blavatsky and Osho and the Hermes, and the Artemis. So this is a wonderful passage here, and you can see the threefoldness of meeting the water and meeting the well and finding the gold in the water. So we have this passage from ancient Saturn and the sun, and we're going to go into like the astral world of the moon, Earth evolution, the third up, and then we're going to go to the actual Earth evolution and the awakening of thinking, feeling, willing as precursors and forebringers forethought. Prometheans, the new Prometheans and the new romantics of the future Earth of Jupiter, Venus, and Vulcan in Steiner terms. But he got a lot of these ideas from Blavatsky. You can look to Mahatma Letters and the Secret Doctrine and Ice Unveiled, and we can see the term spirit self, life spirit, spirit man. Yeah, you can. And a lot of this came from Blavatsky, and Steiner put it in a new way. We want to learn how to work with everybody and not divide and conquer and be some weirdo authority figure who can only quote but doesn't know how it works in the real world. We have to meet the wild man to do that. And that's what initiation is. And that's when people take drugs and get high and get drunk and have wild love life and can't make enough money and become billionaires and have $1 billion house and 50 billion worth of art in it, and we're still not happy because we have a false emptiness, and the emptiness is the womb of the great goddess in our heart soul that the spirit fecundates and awakens a superhero and a Christ, Hermes, Sophia, Dionysian being. I hope you're following me. And instead, we get lost in a new form of egotism and separateness and fear and never acquiring enough because the emptiness can never be filled. The emptiness wants to birth a higher self, and we need to distill our experience into the radical stillness of our inner self. And this isn't about, stealing my insight and writing a hit book like I know a number of people have, or stealing my insight and saying it was. I actually heard a couple people on YouTube that were like sharing my experience I shared with them, and they were saying it was their experience. It was really something else, and they don't give credit. I like to give credit to where I learned things so that we can stay connected in a sense of lineage and family and community. And no man is an island, or they'll sink or be very alone after a while, and nobody will like you. And so egotism might win, but it's very lonely. And it causes a lot of fights with people. Guys, I didn't mean to get lost there. I'm not shaming or blaming anybody. And if it helps you to, we all have to steal like the knowledge like Prometheus. We're stealing the fire of the gods, and nothing new is under the sun. So we have a right to do that. But we have to see that it helps everyone, and it doesn't just help ourselves. So learning about the self and helping yourself is like maybe the beginning of knocking on the door of Manas, spirit self. But then the Buddhic principle is it's got to create family and community and garden and a relationship to all life. And the Atma, the third step, is a whole nother thing. But we'll talk about that later. So we get in touch with the wild man, and we learn to cage the wild man, but then we learn to free the wild man. So we cage our wild side and discipline it, and we don't overindulge. But then we have to learn how to free our wild side without getting lost, and we have to ride it rather than it drives and rides us. And then we find that our deep sense of feelings and water, the waters of love and compassion, they nourish our golden self. And we get little bits of gold that we get really brilliant insights, We have one finger in it. We have one hair in it. And then we awaken with our whole head of knowing, but our heart hasn't fully awakened. And we have to go on. You have stood the trial. You have not stood the trial, and you can stay here no longer. In other words, you went through all these three, but now you have to go into the world for this fourth way. And there you'll learn what poverty is. The real vow of poverty is that we realize how we're humbled by how poor we are spiritually to do anything that can really stop the world from being destroyed around us. That's what's happening. But the giant sees the good heart. And as I mean well, you were just at the well getting turned gold, right? As I mean well, the giant says, and you have a good heart. I mean well by you. There's one thing I will grant you. If you fall into any difficulty, come to the wild forest and cry, Iron Hans, Iron John, and then I will come and help you. My power is great, greater than you think. It's beyond thinking, right? And I have gold and silver in abundance. The sun and moon is gold and silver. And the wisdom of his thinking before that in the Saturn evolution. It's the secret of the philosopher's stone, but I don't want to go into alchemy right now. Then the king's son left the forest and walked by beaten and unbeaten paths. In other words, you go the middle way between the beaten and unbeaten parts of yourself and each other. Ever onwards, until the whole world's enlightened, ever onwards until at length he reached a great city. Like in The Voice of Silence, there's the lesser cities, S-I-D-D-H-I, and the greater cities, the lesser and greater psychic powers. We're going toward the astral plane, I think, or the wisdom empowerment of the etheric into the astral later. So at length he reached a great city, and there he looked for work, but could find none. See, we're not able to work in the spirit yet, in the higher planes, so he could find no work. And the dog kept barking. Hey, the dog kept barking. The lower mind kept trying to tell him you're no good, you have to go backwards. But he had learned nothing. See, if you really learn nothing and you can hold still and see how, you'll start to see how everything moves. That's the emptiness practice I talk about in almost every one of my talks. And he had learned nothing by which he could help himself. Let's look at that sentence. He or she had learned nothing. He learned the emptiness practice of no thingness that Gurdjieff talks about and the Buddhists talk about and that I talk about. Space, the last frontier, calm abiding space equanimity, the no self and thus every self. Do you get it? He had learnt nothing by which he could help himself. Wow, that's a spiritual sentence if I ever saw one. At length, the point, the length, the breadth, the weight, the qualities. At length he went to the palace and asked if they would take him in. The people about court did not at all know what use they could make of him, but they liked him and told him to stay. At length the cook took him into his service and said he might carry wood and water and rake cinders together, like Cinderella, right? He's working in the kitchen, he's learning about the fire, and he can carry water and wood. He's got the experience of the physical and the water of the etheric, and he can rake the old cinders of the burnt out offerings, but he hasn't really learned the service of the higher self yet. The sacrifice, service, and surrender to the higher self, and the dog of him, his old self, keeps barking and trying to make him worry. Once when it so happened that no one else was at hand, in other words, you're getting beyond the physical hand, the cook ordered him to carry the food to the royal table. Hey, go to the dog has to be trained and carry the food to the royal table. When you hear the bark, it's your lower mind and your distractive mind. It's not really a dog. But as he did not like to let his golden hair be seen, he kept his little cap on. Such a thing as that had never yet come under the king's notice. See, this is the astral level where you're serving the higher self of the king and the higher virtues, but you can't really let your goat out because it hasn't been trained. It's only like head learning. It's not heart learning yet. Such a thing as that had never yet come under the king's notice, the golden hair. And he said, when you come to the royal table, you must take your hat off. And he answered, "Oh, Lord, I cannot. I have a bad sore place on my head." Yeah, it hurts to have knowledge that's impotent, doesn't it? Then the king had which is heart trained, in other words, in spiritual will. Then the king had the cook called before him and scolded the cook and asked him how he could take such a boy as that into his service, and that he was to send him away at once. The cook, however, had pity on him and exchanged him for the gardener's boy. So, in other words, you're not ready to be trained in the three magi school. You're trained in the three shepherd boy gardener school of the earth. You know, the garden. There's a return to the garden of pureness and holiness and innocence that's not really ready for the initiation, the full initiation yet. And now the boy had to plant and water the garden, hoe and dig, and bear the wind and bad weather. We're renewing our etheric body with healthy exercise, nature wilderness, the wilderness of each other, and good food, healthy food. Getting off drugs and alcohol and medications, and getting purified if you can. Once in summer, when he was working alone in the garden, the day was so warm, he took his little cap off that the air might cool him. As the sun shone on his hair, it glittered and flashed so that the rays fell into the bedroom of the king's daughter. At some point, our light attracts our divine feminine wisdom and the right love outside of us. If you're a woman, you can see it as the Prince Charming or whatever, You can reverse all this. Don't miss the initiation story, because no matter whether we're male or female, we have to grow up through the physical body and the etheric body that plants, root and open to the sun and the rhythms of the stars and cosmos. And then we open up to the astral body, where we have to go through desire and fear and purify ourselves and renew ourselves through the physical etheric. The etheric has to renew the physical and make us open to the higher etheric and astral, and to the spiritual ego of the real king and queen, the real chemical marriage, alchemical marriage, the hermetic marriage, the union of the sun and moon, or the spirit and matter, Puruka Prakriti, the mysterious conjunction in Carl Jung's book that he talks about. He said that was his last book he'd ever write, and that he needn't say anything else, and he just improved on old books. And he claimed he never really wrote anything new, but maybe he did. So as the sun from his hair shines into the room, and the princess up high above sees the light. We see the light in each other. We don't, like a lot of times we see the light in each other and we don't really see the true person. But let's continue. As the sun shone on his hair, it glittered and flashed so that the rays fell into the bedroom of the king's daughter, the spiritual bedroom, the soul in the heart that wants the spirit and all matters to meet. I'm saying, okay, so the sun shone on his hair, and it glittered and flashed so that the rays fell into the bedroom of the king's daughter. The daughter is really, at this point, the conscious sun, and the king is the Saturn evolution, and the wisdom, of the way past. As the sun shone on his hair, it glittered and flashed so that the rays fell. They fell into the bedroom of the king's daughter, and up she sprang to see what that could be. Then she saw the boy and cried to him, "Boy, bring me a wreath of flowers." He put his cap on with all haste and gathered wildflowers and bound them together. In other words, we bring the gifts that we grow from our wildness that don't destroy us, we bring them to each other, our true love. And when he was ascending, we bring our wildness that's growing in a beautiful way and fragrant way to each other. When he was ascending the stairs with them, the gardener met him and said, "How can you take the king's daughter a garland of such common flowers? Go quickly and get another and seek out the prettiest and rarest." "Oh, no," replied the boy, "the wild ones have more scent and would please her better." Yeah, the old roses smell better and they're stronger, and that the wild parts actually have a really great, we smell good with our wildness, and we are connecting to the wilderness of spiritual matters. So the wild ones have more scent and would please her better. When he got into the room, the king's daughter said, "Take your cap off. It is not seemly to keep it on in my presence." He again said, "I may not. I have a sore head. I'm so tired of thinking spiritual things." He wants to do things, yeah. She, however, he wants to experience his heart and his spiritual will. She, however, caught at his cap and pulled it off. And then his golden hair rolled down on his shoulders, and it was splendid to behold. He wanted to run out, but she held him by the arm and gave him a handful of golden coins, ducats. With these he departed, but he cared nothing for the gold pieces. He took them to the gardener and said, I present them to your children. In other words, we get the real gold from the higher self, wisdom princess Sophia, and we immediately give it away so that other people who are children of the spiritual development and evolution can play with them and learn from them and keep themselves, healthy until they can grow up spiritually. We share our spiritual wisdom with those who know less and suffer more than us, and we honor and worship and hold holy the higher teachings and teachers that we're learning from, who give us their golden coins or gold. The following day, the king's daughter again called to him that he was to bring her a wreath of field flowers, and when he went in with it, she instantly snatched at his cap and wanted to take it away from him, but he held it fast with both hands. She again gave him a handful of ducats or golden coins, but he would not keep them and gave them to the gardener for playthings for his children. We gave them to less fortunate, our gold, that we gain. On the third day, things went just the same. So here's this 3 days again, this threefold movement of learning more and more, of like growing more and more, of like being still more and more, and letting things pass through us and just learning as we go on our journey. On the third day, things went just as the same. She could not get his cap away from him, and he would not have her money. Not long afterwards, the country was, because we want something that more than money can buy, right? Not long afterwards, the country was overrun by war. Yeah, our country's being overrun by war, pollution, darkness, so-called evil, which is live backwards. We're not able to live. And money's no good unless we can apply it to the gold of wisdom, insight, and doing. The king gathered together his people and did not know whether or not he could offer any opposition to the enemy, who was superior in strength and had a mighty army. The world was at war and at odds with itself. And then he said to the gardener's boy, I am grown up and will go to the wars also. Then said the gardener's boy to the king, I have grown up and will go to the war also. Only give me a horse. The others laughed and said, seek one for yourself. So again, this is the fourth way where the spiritual soul represents spirit and matter and says, I will continue. Give me a horse. I'll fight for you. And the others laughed and said, seek one for yourself. Seek one for yourself when we are gone. We will leave one behind us in the stable for you. When they had gone forth, he went into the stable and led the horse out. He was lame of one foot. This is like the Holy Grail story with Parsifal. And everybody laughs at him, and they give him like armor and sword that's way too big for him, and a horse that he can't ride or is no good. It's like Don Quixote on a donkey too, It's like they laugh at him and they make fun of him. How many people have laughed at you because you have a spiritual insight and you have a little thread of gold and you can see with your head, but you can't quite get it fully with your heart, and you can't quite fully do it. And everybody laughs at you, and you're going to save the world when they have all the guns and money and Bibles. And money's no good because it didn't help the rich save the earth, did it? And so a little bit of money's good, but too much is not so good. And you don't want a horse around anymore. So when they leave, the boy goes to the stable and he finds a horse that's lame of one foot. It's like my Lucky Dog records. You're all beat up, but you're so happy to still be alive. Lame of one foot and limped, hobblety-jig, one foot. It's like a single eye, a single heart. Now it's 1 foot. Nevertheless, he mounted it and rode away. You have the single eye, you have the single heart, and now you get the let's say incarnation, from the head, heart to the will and the foot. And but it's also a physical etheric astral set going on here to get to the true ego within yourself, to become find the true soulmate within yourself and other. Others laughed and said, "Seek one for yourself. When we are gone, we will leave one behind." So it's like this, he mounts this one lame of one foot and limped, hobbletee, jig, hobbletee, jig. But he mounted it, rode away in the dark forest. When he came to the outskirts of the forest, he called Iron Hans 3 times, so loudly that it echoed through the trees. And thereupon the wild man appeared immediately and said, "What do you desire?" "I want a strong steed, for I'm going to the wars." Star Wars, Earth Wars, the war within, the war without. You got to conquer that inner war before you're going to conquer the outer one. And you got to use what you got. You don't want to have all their stuff, right? That you shall have, strong steed, and still more than you asked for. Then the wild man went back into the forest, and it was not long before a stable boy came out of it, who led a horse that snorted with its nostrils and could hardly be restrained. And behind them followed a great troop of warriors, entirely equipped in iron. Now we're entering the Bhagavad Gita, the spiritual warriorship of Arjuna with Krishna. This is a very deep story, and elsewhere I talk about the Bhagavad Gita in another talk you might want to check out. But it's very similar to Parsifal here, and the spiritual warrior awakens with his spiritual horse, the wind horse, and his great troop of warriors, which are virtues and transformed negativities, entirely equipped in iron, and his swords flashed in the sun. The youth made over his 3-legged horse to the stable boy. That's another symbolism there. To the stable boy, the youth made over his 3-legged horse to the stable boy, mounted the other, and rode at the head of the soldiers. He's the 4th way beyond the 3. It's like a Joan of Arc, eh? When he got near the battlefield, a great part of the king's men had already fallen, and little was wanting to make the rest give way. Then the youth galloped thither with his iron soldiers, broke like a hurricane over the enemy, and beat down all who opposed him. They began to flee, but the youth pursued and never stopped until there was not a single man left. Instead of returning to the king, see, this reminds you of when Odysseus comes back and he kills all the wrong suitors of the soul. He kills everybody, which isn't really killing people, but it's getting rid of all your bad habits and those things that were trying to marry up with your soul, your spiritual soul. And now the purified self is coming. He kills all the wrong suitors. However, he conducted his troop by byways back to the forest and called forth Iron Hans. "What do you desire?" asked the wild man. "Take back your horse and your troops and give me my 3-legged horse again." All that he asked was done, and soon he was riding on his 3-legged horse. The spirit soul body that's not totally incarnated into the thinking, feeling, willing with the spiritual enlightenment, true spiritual ego of the king and queen and the spiritual warrior, the Amabuddha Manas, you might say. And so he's coming back. When the king returned to his palace, his daughter went to him and wished him joy of his victory. "I am not the one who carried away the victory," said he, "but a strange knight who came to my assistance with his soldiers." Now I'm going to leave it off here, and I want to remind you of the strange night. The night is not the total daylight of self-realization and full enlightenment. It's the night that serves the 12 signs of the zodiac, like Christian Rosicrucian, is like almost lame or hurt. He rides a lame 3-legged horse, and he dies and is reborn in knighthood. Parsifal finds this knighthood. and he kills the Red Knight, and the other knights have a hard time believing it, you know. And so you see how we've been going through this physical, etheric, astral world. You know, the unknown huntsman outdoes the three. He's like outdoing the previous three, and he drains the pool, and the wild man comes out. He loses a dog of the lower mind, and you find the wild man, and it gets us to this, like, the golden ball in the cage and the threefoldness there, and you ride the wild man, and then you meet the king, and you're not ready to cook, and you're the gardener, you're cooking the gardener. It's really a wild story, and we don't have time to go through everything slow enough to see how much is hidden with the key under the queen's pillow, and riding the wild man rather than be in the higher self and the lower self, the wild man and the thinking, feeling, willing principle join up, and we meet the princess, you know, we meet our soulmate inwardly and outwardly, and we actually pull off. We're like utilizing the trained, universal, cosmic, wild forces of the spirit and soul, and it's this combination lock that undoes everything. And we're going to stop here, and you know, the princess wants to know, the daughter wants to know who this strange knight is, and the king does not know. He followed the enemy, and I did not see him again. She inquired of the gardener where his boy was, but he smiled and said, he has just come home on his three-legged horse, and the others have been mocking him and crying, here comes our hobblety jig back again. See, in other words, we become spiritual, and nobody recognizes it, and they make fun of us. And and they ask, under what hedge have you been lying, sleeping all the time? A lot of times we need to sleep off these higher insights we get. So he said, I did the best of all, and it would have gone badly without me. And then he was still more ridiculed, and the dogs kept barking. So I leave you here, and I guess we're going to go to a third. It's the unending story. We're not done. You know, we have to sleep on this and digest it, and it's the never-ending story that the weird king of the world wants another virgin moment to, like, indulge in, and then crash and murder the moment, and we don't get enlightened in it. We want another day. We want another pure moment, and we have to keep creating this virgin moment until the real, real warrior, princess warrior, Athena, Artemis, Joan of Arc, Madame Blavatsky. We need the real spiritual hero, the Mother Teresa's, and you know, we need the real spiritual Sophia goddess to guide us, and the real knights of the Grail. And I leave you here, and I want you to ponder everything I've said, that we wake up, and we come from the thinking, feeling, and willing when we wake up. The physical, emotional, mental grows up, and then we grow down, and we're transforming the physical, etheric, astral, and we're on this journey, like I talk about with Psyche and Inanna and Ishtar, and Psyche has to go through these 4 initiations by the Queen Mother Venus. I mean, there's a lot of myths that touch on this. Any myth is good if we can get enlightened. We don't have to go to all the myths. We just need one good one. We don't need every spiritual teaching. We just need one good one. And right now I'm telling you that you're connected to everything in the universe. And part of us is ever dying and getting born again. And we're connected to nothing, a stillness inside that's still listening for the next step to take. We're still listening to the gold that's growing within our spiritual soul. So I'll see you next time. This is Robert of Mayflower Bookshop, awakening the mind between everything and nothing. The mind stream continuum that wants the whole world to awaken in a golden sunshine, Aquarian age, holy moment together. MayflowerBookshop.com, at your higher self service.